So it's really interesting to see how data that's being collected and analysed in collaboration with other organisations, universities, can actually help us understand a bit more about squirrel populations, their ecology, and how they're using their habitat and their distribution throughout the landscape, as well as looking at potential solutions for grey squirrel management through things like fertility control and pine martins. So it's really exciting to see how, you know, in the future that might lead to different grey squirrel methods of control. So now going to the question and answer session for our speakers, and there's been lots of questions that come in, so I'll do our best to get through as many as we can. So first of all, let's have a look. Question for Kay. There's been quite a few about fertility. So do you have any idea how much it would cost to implement fertility control at a landscape scale? And how does this compare to culling, and who would fund it? A few questions.
Good question. Yeah, so I mean, until we have the oral contraceptive route and the feeding hopper specifications, we won't know how much that will cost. And at the moment, we're doing everything on a small research scale. Once that's scaled up to a manufacturing scale, it will obviously cost less. But we will be looking at that, you know, over the course of the research. And it may be that you know, people may be able to use these hoppers in an area, but they don't necessarily need them for the whole of the year, like traps maybe. So we could set up a scheme where people share them across a region. So you have them for a week or 2 weeks, and then you pass them on to somebody else who has them for a week or 2 weeks. So that would reduce the cost that you wouldn't necessarily have to, you know, spend. You wouldn't necessarily need your own feeding hoppers. Yeah, I think it will all just depend on how much it will, you know, what the products are. But if you're looking at just putting something out in a woodland for a short amount of time, for 4 days, a week, 2 weeks, you're reducing the amount of manpower that you need, and that you would necessarily pay someone to putting out traps and to go shooting.
Okay, thank you. A question for Ewan this time. A sort of specific one. Does the 30 to 40% impact of trapping grey squirrel on grey squirrel extinction take into account Scotland-wide data, and does that vary across the regions?
Yeah, interestingly, of all the parameters in that model, grey squirrel extinction is one of the very few that doesn't vary regionally. So it appears that there's no difference between regions, either in the effectiveness of trapping or in the kind of baseline level of extinctions of greys between different regions.
Okay. Question for Peter. Is there scope for testing your landscape-based model using data from the RSNE, so the red squirrels, Northern England, and others in Northern England?
Yes, absolutely. We've actually applied the model in the north of England for Kitland Forest and worked with Tom Durnley to model what would happen in Kitland. So as long as the kind of data requirements on the squirrel side we're covered from the work we've done, and so to run the model you need basically land cover data or a forest stock map, and then it depends on how you want to apply it, but so essentially, yes.
Okay. I've got a question for Emma about pine martins. They're asking, what is the most practical method for local groups to estimate pine marten density?
Well, so it's a tricky enough thing to do, but it is definitely possible. So basically you want to be able to identify individuals, and you can do that through getting DNA samples from their hair, which is really easy to get, but then obviously you've got to pay a lab to privately do your DNA analysis. But you could also, using trail cameras, try and have the trail camera set up in a certain way, and there's info online, I think, how you can do this. You can get a good view of the animal's bibs. So they all have individual bibs, and some of them can be quite easy to identify from others. So in that way, you can also identify individuals, which allows you to count them too. So that's probably going to be the cheaper way. A bit of an art in getting the camera set up so you can check out the bibs, but there's resources online that will help you do that.
Quite a few activities. So I've got a couple more for Kay. So there are, as some people are asking, is there any potential side effects of the different types of contraceptives? And then once one of those has been found to be successful, how long do you think it would take to be rolled out across the UK?
Yeah, so at the moment we haven't seen any side effects. So the immunocontraceptive that's being used is already used and is a registered product elsewhere in the world and used on other species, but in injectable form. And in some species, there's found to be an injection site reaction, such as we might get from if we have an injection. But there's no other side effects been seen, and we haven't seen any other side effects. But again, that is something we're very much monitoring. In terms of the length of time, the registration phase should take about 3 to 5 years for the final product. So if we're looking at starting that at the end of the research phase, which is another 2 years, then it would be 3 to 5 years from then. What we want to do is understand the data that we need to collect for the registration dossier now and start the collection of that data, so that the 3 to 5 years will be from when we start the data collection, which will be within the research phase. So as soon as we possibly can, we're going to start collecting that data.
Okay, thank you. A question for Ewan. Is it likely the declining probability of grey detection Tayside is due to lower grey density? They're referring to Anne-Marie's presentation earlier, which said the trapping techniques improved in 2019. So just interested to see if that had an effect on detection probability.
Sure. Well, I'd imagine that whenever trapping impacts density, the detection probability will go down. The data I presented only goes up to 2018. So I really can't comment too much, I'm afraid. Yeah, you would expect that as trapping becomes more effective, population density will go down. As a result, it will become more difficult to detect at least one individual.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sort of a general question. When modelling red squirrel hotspots, do you use public sightings data? If so, how do you account for the correlation between human passages and sighting locations?
I can tell you what we do. There's obviously, I remember when I was back in Newcastle, we looked at a red squirrel distribution map, and they were all over the place in Northumberland, but hardly any in Kielder, where we knew there were lots of red squirrels. So in terms of the modelling, what we do is you start with a squirrel distribution map, but obviously this is usually an underestimate and relates to, especially when you use sightings data, to where people have seen them, and there are places where people hardly go. So in addition to that, we do a model spin up, so where we run the model for a few years before you use it as an input, and let the squirrels disperse. So you get squirrels in available habitats within that area to kind of mitigate against that error where you have hotspots, but they're really they don't compare, because the effort between the different areas is very, very different, and the sightings by people vary, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Another question, how long do you think it would take for pine martins to be widespread enough for grey control to no longer be the main form of keeping grey numbers down?
So I'm actually going to hand that over to our Pete, our modeller. They are slow. They're very slow breeders, unfortunately.
I don't know. It's something that we could run the model for to see how long it would take. But at the moment, I couldn't give an estimate.
Definitely something that would be worth modelling. For sure.
Another question about the fertility. So if it takes 4 days for the contraceptive to be taken by the grey squirrels in a wood, how long before a significant indent in the grey squirrel population is made in that same wood?
Yeah, so if you look back to or you think back to the graph that I showed, it depends on the efficacy of the contraceptive being used. So if the contraceptive was taken, it was 50% effective and 50% of the squirrels were made infertile, then it would take a lot longer. It would take, about 5 to 10 years for there to be a significant decline, and then it would drop off gradually. But if you looked at it being over 75%, then you're looking at quite a significant decline over the first 5 years, and then it tails off over the next 10 to 15 years as the last few squirrels die out. But yeah, so what we're hoping is that what we can do is increase the efficacy of the contraceptive, so it's getting to as many squirrels as possible through the feeding hopper, and it's being as effective as possible. But we'll continue to model this as the research goes.
Okay, I've got a question for Devin. Regarding the urban grey squirrel home ranges, how will the findings be used to guide the control of greys in Aberdeen City?
Well, it's mostly to do with the reach of the trapping, I guess. So we're going to be looking at trapping success. I have records from like the past 10 years from SSRS, and we're going to be overlaying the home ranges with the traps and habitat maps and seeing what sort of effect different variables have on the success of the traps, and see if we concentrate trapping in areas where SSRS does have access, like in parks, if that will draw out squirrels from private gardens, because right now that's the biggest issue, is that there's some areas where we can't trap, so we want to know where like the efforts can be more effectively concentrated.
Okay. Another question down here is, what effect might fertility control have on predator fertility, if any?
So with the immunocontracetives, they are absorbed and they're broken down in the system. So there shouldn't be any knock-on impacts for predators. If a predator came along and ate a grey squirrel that had been had a contraceptive and been made infertile, it wouldn't make the predator infertile, because the protein had essentially already been broken down in the body, and it would only be affecting that animal.
Okay. Question for Emma, I think. What are the major threats to pine martins? And kind of a side question is, can squirrel pox affect pine martins at all?
So I'm not a disease expert, but as far as I know, squirrel pox can't affect pine martins, but I'm not a disease expert. So, and what was the first question? What was?
What are the major threats to pine martins?
So the major threats to pine martins, I guess, are an inhospitable environment, really, in terms of habitat, and in terms of predator control, probably. They are a protected species, so it is obviously illegal to control or to kill pine marten. But I would imagine that probably currently their biggest threat is that this does happen, unfortunately. But also as well, there's a lack of suitable habitat for den sites and breeding as well.
Okay. Another question is, does the requirement to trap on a landscape scale mean, rather than concentrating our efforts on the Highland line, whether we should also be trapping sort of more heavily in other areas such as Stirling to sort of prevent immigration into the Highland line area? So sort of based on kind of things we found out from modelling and other data.
Zoom, that's for me. Well, so I think the results that I showed there about the impact of connectivity, showing that extinction rates increase, the lower you can push connectivity, probably speak more to the kind of the increased effectiveness that you can get whenever you trap at a larger scale. And if you really want to ensure that the greys go extinct in a certain area, that you get much more bang for buck whenever you apply that trapping on a landscape scale. Does that mean that resources should be spread more thinly in order to keep greys out of priority areas? I would be hesitant. And the scale of this landscape I'm talking about probably doesn't really stretch much further than 20 or 30 kilometres. But yes, I think you get more bang for buck whenever you invest at a landscape scale, and that's something that should be paid a lot of mind whenever planning the strategic view of a trapping strategy.
Okay. And kind of a side question is whether you think urban cats could help tip the balance towards reds in Aberdeen City. Whether that would have any impact.
I'm not sure that they would significantly impact. If they remove a few grey squirrels, that's helping us, so it's all good. But I'm not sure that they would significantly contribute, or that we wouldn't be able to do it without them. Let's say.
Okay. I'm not sure who this would be aimed at, but is there any traction in the hypothesis that indirectly pine marten may affect some reduction in breeding output of grey squirrels through increasing stress and subsequent cortisol levels in breeding females?
So, to the best of my knowledge, there isn't any data on that. And in order to do that, you would need to be, quite a detailed study looking at, the physiology of grey squirrels in the presence of a pine marten population that are predating on them. It's a notoriously difficult thing to find, as anyone who's tried to study pine martens and squirrels knows, that it's hard to find a place where there are enough grey squirrels to study. So big enough sample size of grey squirrels and enough pine martens there to carry out the study as well. That hasn't been done to date, to my knowledge, and that would really be needed to look at things like cortisol level in grey squirrels and compare that or measure that against pine marten activity.
Okay. Peter, someone's asking whether you're aiming to do another study like the one that informed the priorities of this SSRS project anytime soon.
Not at the moment. At the moment, we don't have any funding, and our PhD student has kind of finished, so we don't have a student that we could say, could you do this for free, or with very limited funding. So if somebody offers us money to do a specific project, I'm sure Andy wouldn't say no, but without funding, we have to live too, sadly. There are no plans.
Okay. And Kay, someone was asking if you're currently looking for areas to trial the fertility work in the field.
All of the funded research that we're funding has already been planned. However, if somebody has funding and wants to contribute to any extra research, we have got a suite of other extra bits that we could do if there was extra funding available for them. So I know that there have been various inquiries from people, and if there was funding available, yes. Without funding, no. At the moment, we have planned out the research for stage for this particular project. So, but thank you.
Okay, I think maybe the final question. Somebody said they noticed in the map that Skye has had pine martens fairly recently. Were they found on the island before the bridge was built, or have they colonised from the mainland across the bridge?
I don't know. I'm just going by records. Somebody else in the panel might have a better awareness of the Skye area.
Okay, well, right. Well, I think we're pretty much at the end there. So thank you everyone for sending your questions. And that brings us to the end of the first day of the Knowledge Fair. I just want to say a massive thank you to all our speakers throughout the day. I hope everyone's enjoyed hearing about all the things that are happening across the project, and also all the other work and research that's being done across the UK, which all feeds into red squirrel conservation. So tomorrow we have another full day of talks that are going to be looking at community action and the future of red squirrel conservation. That will be starting at 10 a.m. So hopefully see you all back here tomorrow. And thank you very much and have a good evening.